The wind in Purgatory Flats did not just blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of 3 dried-up counties, a fine, alkaline powder that found its way into the seams of boots, the actions of rifles, and the deep creases of men's faces. It was 1878, and the territory was less a place of promise than a graveyard for good intentions. Caleb Reed sat at the far table of the saloon number 10, his back pressed against the rough-hewn pine of the wall. It was a habit born of 20 years spent hunting men who did not wish to be found. He never sat near a window, and he never sat in the center of a room. His hands, wrapped around a glass of whiskey he had been nursing for an hour, were steady, scarred, and stained with the permanent grease of gun oil and saddle leather. A jagged white line ran from his left temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from a horse thief in the Dakota Territory who had been faster with a knife than he was with his wits. Caleb never spoke of it. He let the scar do the talking, and usually it said enough to keep the drunkards and the curious at bay. He drank alone. In this line of work, friends were liabilities, and conversation was a distraction that could get a man killed. The bat-wing doors groaned open, admitting a slice of the blinding midday sun and a man in a suit that cost more than the building they were sitting in. The man dusted off his lapels with a grimace, looking around the dim, smoky room with undisguised distaste until his eyes landed on Caleb. "Mr. Vance, the lawyer for the Cattlemen's Association." Caleb did not rise. He watched the man approach, noting the polished boots that had clearly not walked more than 100 yards on dirt, and the nervous way Vance's hand hovered near his vest pocket. "Mr. Reed," Vance said, pulling out a chair but hesitating to sit on the stained wood. "I trust you received my message." Caleb took a slow sip of the whiskey. It burned, a familiar and grounding heat. "Sit down." "Vance, you are drawing eyes." Vance sat, perched on the edge of the chair. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of thick parchment, sliding it across the table. "Judge Holloway sends his regards. He wants this matter handled with the utmost discretion and speed. We are prepared to offer a premium." Caleb unfolded the paper. It was a wanted poster, fresh from the press, the ink still smelling sharp. Wanted for grand larceny. Arson and attempted murder, the woman known as Angel, reward $3,000. Caleb's eyebrows lifted slightly. $3,000. That was not a bounty. It was a king's ransom. A man could buy a sprawling tract of land in Oregon for that. He could build a house with glass windows and a porch that looked out over green valleys instead of gray scrub. He could stop sleeping with his gun under his pillow. "She does not look like much of a killer," Caleb said, studying the sketch. It was a rough likeness, depicting a young woman with high cheekbones and wide, defiant eyes. "She is deceptive," Vance said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She worked in the judge's household, a charity case. You understand, the judge took her in out of the kindness of his heart, despite her background." Caleb looked up. "Her background?" Vance sniffed. "She is of mixed blood, Apache, on her mother's side, they say, or maybe Mexican. It is hard to keep track of the mongrel lines out here. The point is, she has that wildness in her. Ungrateful. She set fire to the carriage house, stole the judge's strongbox, and nearly slit the throat of the stablemaster when he tried to stop her. She is dangerous. Mr. Reed. A viper in human skin." Caleb looked back at the poster. The accusations were written in the flowery, heavy-handed legalese of the East, words like malicious intent and depraved heart standing out against the rough grain of the paper. It felt too polished. "Too heavy for a domestic dispute. Alive or dead?" Caleb asked. Vance paused. "The judge prefers her returned alive to face justice. It is a matter of law and order, but the poster says dead or alive. If she resists, well, we understand the hazards of your profession." Caleb folded the poster and tucked it into his vest. $3,000. "Half now," Vance said, sliding a heavy canvas sack across the table. The clink of gold coins was a sound that cut through the murmur of the saloon. "Half when you bring her back." Caleb looked at the bag. It represented the end, the last ride, No more freezing nights in the high desert. No more looking over his shoulder. "I will take the job," Caleb said. "Good." Vance stood up, looking relieved to be leaving. She was last seen heading south, toward the Badlands near the border. "Run her down. Reed. Do not let her cross the river." Caleb watched the lawyer leave. He finished his whiskey, feeling the weight of the gold in his pocket and the weight of the lie in the air. He had hunted enough men to know when a story did not sit right in the saddle. A stable master with a slit throat. A burned carriage house. For a girl who looked no older than 20, it did not matter, he told himself. He was not paid to ask questions. He was paid to close the book. The trail south was a scar on the face of the world. The land here had been stripped of kindness. It was a place of cracked riverbeds that had not seen water in a decade, of twisted mesquite trees that clawed at the sky like skeletal hands, and wind that never ceased its low, mournful howling. Caleb rode a big roan gelding he called Bishop. The horse was ugly, bad-tempered, and possessed endurance that defied biology. They moved at a steady trot, eating up the miles while the sun beat down on Caleb's hat with the weight of a hammer. He tracked her for 4 days. She was not good at hiding, but she was fast. She moved with the desperation of a creature that knows the hounds are loose. He found her camps, small and pathetic circles of stones where she had tried to build fires. He found the heel of a boot print in the mud of a dried spring, the stride short and uneven. But as he rode, the unease in his gut began to grow. On the second day, he stopped at a burned-out homestead she had allegedly raided for supplies. The poster had claimed she was an arsonist, a fire starter. The ruins were still smoking when he arrived. Caleb dismounted and walked through the ash. He knelt by the doorframe, running a gloved finger over the char. The fire had started on the outside, at the corners. It had been set with kerosene. He could smell the chemical taint of it in the wood. He circled the perimeter. In the soft dust behind the house, he found tracks. They were not the small, uneven prints of the girl he had been following. These were heavy, flat-heeled boots, a man's boots. 2 men, actually. They had ridden in, dismounted, set the fire, and ridden out to the east. The girl's tracks came later. He saw where she had approached the ruins, circled them once, and then fled south in a panic. "She did not burn this," Caleb said to the empty air. He stood up, looking at the horizon. The poster said she was a monster. The tracks said she was being framed, or perhaps she was being herded. Why would the judge lie about the nature of the crimes? If she was a thief, call her a thief. Why paint her as a demon? Because a demon is easier to kill, he thought, and a demon does not get a trial. He remounted Bishop and spurred the horse forward. The temperature began to drop as they climbed into the high scrubland. The heat of the day vanished, replaced by a biting cold that seeped through his duster and settled in his bones. On the 5th day, the sky turned the color of a bruised plum. The wind shifted, carrying the metallic scent of snow and freezing rain. A storm was coming. A blue norther that would sweep down from the peaks and freeze a man solid if he was caught in the open. Caleb pushed Bishop hard. He knew there was an old way station 10 miles ahead, a relic of a failed stagecoach line. It was little more than a stone shack with a caved-in roof, but it would offer walls. The snow began to fall as twilight deepened. Heavy, wet flakes that stuck to his eyelashes and coated Bishop's mane. Visibility dropped to near zero. Caleb navigated by instinct in the faint, gray shape of the trail. He saw the way station looming out of the white haze like a tombstone. Bishop snorted, pinning his ears back. Caleb reached down and patted the horse's neck. "Easy," he murmured. He saw the horse first, a gaunt, limping mare tied to a dead scrub oak on the leeward side of the shack. It was saddled, but the leather was old and cracking. The animal looked ready to collapse. She was here. Caleb drew his Colt Peacemaker. He did not cock the hammer. The click would be too loud in the whistling wind. He swung down from the saddle, his boots crunching softly in the gathering snow. He tied Bishop next to the mare, giving the strange horse a quick check. It had thrown a shoe and its hoof was split. No wonder she had stopped. He moved to the door of the shack. It hung on one leather hinge, banging softly against the frame. Caleb pushed it open with the barrel of his gun and stepped inside. The interior was dark, smelling of wet rot and ancient dust. The only light came from the gray storm outside. He scanned the corners. There, a shadow detached itself from the gloom in the far corner. A figure lunged at him, a glint of steel flashing in the dim light. Caleb did not panic. He sidestepped with the efficiency of a man who had done this 100 times. He caught the wrist that held the knife, twisting it sharply. There was a gasp of pain, and the knife clattered to the dirt floor. He shoved the attacker back, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to create space. "Stay down," he commanded. His voice was gravel, low and filling the small room. The figure crumbled against the stone wall, sliding down to the dirt. Caleb holstered his gun and struck a lucifer match against his thumbnail. The flame flared to life, illuminating the room. She was smaller than he expected. The woman known as Angel sat pressed against the stones, clutching her wrist. Her clothes were rags, a torn calico dress covered by a man's oversized wool coat that was filthy with mud. Her hair, black as a raven's wing, was matted and wet, but it was her eyes that held him. They were dark, terrified, and burning with a fierce, animalistic defiance. Her face was gaunt, the hollows of her cheeks speaking of weeks of hunger. There was a bruise blooming on her forehead, and her lip was split. She looked nothing like the seductress on the poster. She looked like a child who had been kicked by the world until she forgot how to stand. "You!" she hissed, her voice rasping. "You are one of them." Caleb shook the match out as it burned his fingers and lit a small lantern he carried on his belt. He set it on a crate between them. "I am not one of them," he said. "I am the man who caught you." She scrambled backward, trying to find purchase on the wall to stand, her eyes darting to the open door. "Do not try it," Caleb said. "The storm will kill you before you make a mile, and your horse is done. I would rather the storm—" She spat. She tried to lunge past him, a desperate, clumsy sprint toward the doorway. She was fast, fueled by adrenaline, but she was weak. Caleb caught her by the back of the coat. It was like catching a bird. She felt fragile, light. He swung her around, not roughly, but with an immovable solidity. She flailed, her hands striking at his chest, useless against the heavy canvas of his duster. "Let me go!" she screamed, the sound tearing at her throat. Caleb pinned her arms to her sides, holding her steady until the fight drained out of her, leaving her trembling violently in his grip. He looked down at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, not the fear of being arrested, but the fear of being hurt. It was a specific kind of fear he had seen in dogs that had been beaten too often. He released her slowly, taking a step back to show he did not intend to strike her. "Run, if you want. Angel," he said. The words hung in the cold air. It was not a taunt, it was a statement of fact, delivered with a weary heaviness. She froze, staring at him, her chest heaving. "But the West is smaller than you think," he continued. "There is nowhere you can go that a man with $5,000 on his head cannot find you, and the next man who finds you might not ask you to sit down." She stared at him, the fight slowly turning into confusion. "5,000?" she whispered. "3," Caleb corrected, though the discrepancy in his own mind bothered him. The poster said 3. She slumped, her legs giving out. She sat heavily on the dirt floor, pulling her knees to her chest. $3,000, she murmured. "For a maid." Caleb watched her. The poster called her a thief and a killer. But looking at her, seeing the way she curled in on herself for warmth, seeing the clear evidence of starvation, the doubt in his gut turned into a certainty. He unrolled his bedroll near the spot where the roof was still intact. He gathered some dry wood from a pile in the corner, left by some previous traveler, and started a small fire. The smoke curled up toward the hole in the roof. "Why didn't you kill me?" she asked. Her voice was small now, barely audible over the wind howling outside. "The poster says dead or alive. I saw it in the last town." Caleb poked the fire. "I do not kill unless I have to, and the judge wants you back." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "The judge wants me silent." Caleb paused. He looked at her across the flickering firelight. Why? She shook her head, burying her face in her knees. It does not matter. You are taking me back. It is the same thing as killing me. Caleb did not answer. He took a piece of dried venison and a biscuit from his saddlebag and tossed them to her. She looked at the food, then at him, her suspicion warring with her hunger. Hunger won. She tore into the meat with trembling hands. The storm outside intensified. The wind slammed against the stone walls, whistling through the chinks in the mortar. The temperature in the shack was dropping rapidly. The small fire was fighting a losing battle against the freezing night. Caleb sat with his back to the wall, his hat pulled low. He watched her eat. He thought about the $3,000. He thought about the land in Oregon. And he thought about the tracks at the burned homestead that didn't match hers. He was a bounty hunter. He dealt in bodies and coins. Justice was a luxury for people who could afford it. But Caleb Reed had a code. Battered and frayed as it was, he did not deliver lambs to the slaughterhouse. You take the bedroll, he said abruptly. She looked up, crumbs on her lip. What? It is freezing, he said. Take the blankets. I have my coat. I will not sleep next to you, she said, her voice hardening again. Caleb sighed. He stood up and moved the bedroll closer to the fire, then sat back down on the hard earth, wrapping his duster tight around himself. I did not ask you to sleep next to me. I told you to take the blankets. If you freeze to death, I lose my payday. She hesitated, then crawled toward the bedroll. She wrapped herself in the wool blankets, pulling them up to her chin. She watched him, her eyes wide and unblinking in the firelight. Caleb tipped his hat down over his eyes, feigning sleep. But he did not sleep. He listened to the wind, and he listened to the breathing of the woman across the fire. Uneasy proximity. That was what this was. He was the wolf, and she was the rabbit, trapped together in a stone burrow while the world froze outside. Caleb, he thought to himself, you are a fool. He shifted, trying to find a comfortable spot against the stone. The cold was seeping through the floor. He knew that by morning, the fire would be dead, and the cold would be unbearable. An hour later, he heard her move. You are shivering, she said into the darkness. I am fine, he grumbled. You are rattling like a bag of bones, she retorted. Her voice had gained a little strength with the food. Caleb lifted the brim of his hat. The fire was dying low. She was sitting up, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. If we both freeze, no one wins, she said. She lifted the edge of the blanket. It was an invitation born of survival, nothing more. A truce dictated by the thermometer. Caleb hesitated. He knew the danger of this. Not physical danger, he could snap her neck before she could blink, but the danger of closeness, the danger of seeing the human being beneath the bounty. He crawled over to the bedroll. He lay down on the edge, keeping his back to her, his hand resting near his gun belt. She lay down on the other side, putting as much distance between them as the narrow blankets would allow. They lay there in the dark, the heat of their bodies slowly pooling under the wool. He could smell the dust in her hair and the faint, metallic scent of the blood from her split lip. Run, if you want. Angel, he had said. She hadn't run, and now, listening to the storm scream like a banshee over the plains. Caleb Reed wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He wondered if, by morning, he would still be the man who could turn her over to a hangman for a bag of gold. The wind howled, and the fire went out, leaving them in the dark, breathing the same air, waiting for the dawn. The morning sun did not rise so much as it bled across the horizon, a pale, sickly yellow that offered no warmth against the receding storm. The snow that had threatened to bury them had turned to a slushy, miserable gray mud that clung to the hooves of the roan gelding. Bishop. Caleb Reed tightened the cinch on his saddle, the leather creaking in the stillness. The woman stood 10 feet away, wrapped in the wool blanket he had lent her, shivering not from cold but from an exhaustion that sat deep in the marrow. Her own horse was dead lame, left behind at the way station with a cut lead rope and a silent apology. Come on, Caleb said, his voice flat. He mounted Bishop, feeling the animal's sturdy weight beneath him. He kicked his left boot out of the stirrup and extended a hand down to her. She looked at the hand, then at his face. Her eyes were dark pools of mistrust. She did not move. "We have 40 miles to the county seat," Caleb said, keeping his hand extended. "You can walk and freeze, or you can ride and live. It makes no difference to my wallet, but it slows me down." Angel hesitated, her gaze darting to the open expanse of the plains. It was a landscape that promised nothing but exposure. The sky was mercilessly wide, a vaulted ceiling of pale blue that made human beings feel like insects crawling on a dinner plate. Buzzards were already circling something dead a mile to the east, black specks spiraling in the updraft. She stepped forward, gripped his forearm, and swung up behind him. She smelled of wood smoke and old fear. Her arms went around his waist tentatively, barely touching the canvas of his duster. "Hold on," Caleb commanded. He spurred Bishop forward. The horse groaned, but moved into a steady, ground-eating trot. As they picked up speed, her grip tightened by necessity. She pressed her face against his back to shield it from the biting wind. Caleb could feel the heat of her, a strange and unsettling weight against his spine. He was used to the solitude of the saddle, to the only heartbeat being his own and the horse's. This proximity felt like an intrusion. They rode in silence for hours. The terrain shifted from the high scrub into the rolling, dust-choked plains. The wind never ceased. It whipped the mane of the horse and stung their cheeks with grit. Caleb tried to piece together the puzzle of her. A maid who burned a carriage house, a thief who stole a strongbox. But she had no money, no weapon, and she rode like someone who had spent more time polishing silver than breaking horses. "What is your name?" Caleb asked, pitching his voice over the wind. "Angel," she said against his back. "That is what the poster says." "What is your name?" There was a long silence. He thought she might not answer, her stubbornness a tangible force radiating through her contact with him. "It is the only name I have," she said finally. "It is a lie." Caleb said, "Nobody names a child Angel in this country unless they are expecting her to die young." She did not respond. Her silence was not empty. It was heavy. It felt like a wall she had built brick by brick, mortared with shame and a careful, desperate strategy. If she gave him nothing, he could take nothing. They made camp that evening in the shelter of a dry creek bed, shielded from the worst of the wind by a cut bank of red earth. Caleb built a fire from dried mesquite roots that burned hot and fast. He watched her as she sat across the flames. She was unwrapping the makeshift bandage on her ankle. The leather of her boots was worn through, and the skin beneath was raw and blistered. "Let me see that," Caleb said. He reached for his saddlebag and pulled out a tin of salve he used for saddle sores and gunshot grazes alike. It smelled of turpentine and beeswax. She pulled her foot back sharply, her eyes narrowing. "I can do it. You will infect it, and then I will have to cut your foot off," Caleb said, uncapping the tin. "I do not get paid for a one-legged woman." He moved around the fire, crouching before her. He waited, his hands open, palms up. He did not grab her. He let her make the choice. It was a small thing, a concession of power that went against every instinct he had as a hunter, but he needed her to stop looking at him like he was the devil himself. Slowly, reluctantly, she extended her leg. Caleb took her heel in his hand. His grip was firm but surprisingly gentle. His hands were calloused, the skin rough as sandstone, but his touch was precise. He cleaned the raw skin with water from his canteen and applied the salve. She hissed in pain, her body tensing. "Almost done," he murmured. He looked up. She was watching him. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of confusion and scrutiny. She was measuring him, he realized. Like a man testing the balance of a knife before buying it. She was looking for the cruelty she expected. The roughness that her life had taught her was inevitable from men who carried guns. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. "I told you," Caleb said, tearing a strip from a clean rag to bind her foot. "I need you walking. You could tie me to the horse. You could drag me. Men have done worse." Caleb finished the knot and sat back on his heels, wiping the grease from his hands. "I am not other men." "No," she said. her voice dropping to a whisper that carried a sting. "You are a bounty hunter. You are worse. You sell people for money." Caleb stiffened. The accusation hit a target he thought he had armored long ago. "I sell justice," he said, his voice dropping into a low growl. "You sell what rich men call justice," she corrected. "There is a difference." Caleb stood up abruptly, towering over her. The firelight cast his shadow long and distorted against the cutbank. "Get some sleep. We hit Granite Wells tomorrow." He walked away into the darkness to check on the horse, needing the cold air to cool the sudden flush of anger in his neck. He was frustrated by her, but more frustrated by the fact that her words echoed the doubts he had been drowning in whiskey for 5 years. Granite Wells was a scar on the side of a mountain, a town built of timber and desperation. It existed solely to service the silver mines to the north. The main street was a river of mud churned by wagons, and the air smelled of sulfur, unwashed bodies, and stale beer. They rode in at midday. Caleb felt the change in the air immediately. In the open plains, they were just 2 specks under the sun. Here, they were a spectacle. He felt Angel shrink against his back. She pulled the collar of the oversized coat up, trying to hide her face, but it was no use. Her hair, the dark, heavy braid that marked her heritage, was visible. Heads turned as they passed the boardwalks. Men stopped their conversation to spit tobacco juice into the mud and stare. Women in high-buttoned dresses pulled their children closer, whispering behind gloved hands. "Apache whore," someone muttered from the porch of the general store. "Run away," another voice said. "Look at the way she clings to him." Caleb kept his eyes forward, his jaw set. He could feel Angel trembling. It was a vibration that traveled through her ribs and into his. It was not fear of physical harm. It was the shame of being stripped naked by 100 pairs of eyes. He reined Bishop in front of the boarding house, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint. "Stay close to me," Caleb said as he dismounted. He reached up and helped her down. As her boots hit the mud, a man stepped off the boardwalk. He was big, wearing the grime of the mines and the arrogance of a man who had consumed too much midday liquor. "Well now," the man leered, blocking their path. "What have we here? You bringing in a new girl for the house? Hunter? She looks a bit used up, but I got $1 for a look." The man reached out, his dirty hand grasping for the lapel of Angel's coat. Angel flinched back, a sound of distress escaping her throat. Caleb did not shout. He did not draw his gun. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion. His left hand shot out, catching the miner's wrist in a grip that stopped the man cold. With his right hand, Caleb drove the heel of his palm into the man's nose. There was a sickening crunch of cartilage. The miner stumbled back, blood spurting over his mustache, his eyes watering in shock. Caleb stepped into the space, placing himself between the man and Angel. He did not raise his voice. He spoke in a tone that was conversational, almost bored. "Touch her again, and I will break the arm that is attached to that hand," the miner sputtered, clutching his face. "Do you know who I am?" "I know you are bleeding on my boots," Caleb said. "Move." The miner looked at Caleb's eyes, then at the low-slung holster on his hip. The alcohol evaporated from his system, replaced by the cold reality of violence. He backed away, cursing under his breath, and disappeared into the crowd. Caleb turned to Angel. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She looked at him not with gratitude, but with a new kind of wariness. Violence was a language she understood, and he spoke it fluently. "Inside," Caleb said. He rented a room on the 2nd floor. It was small, containing a narrow bed with a quilt that had seen better decades and a wash basin with a cracked pitcher. "I will take the floor," Caleb said, dropping his saddlebags in the corner. "You take the bed." Angel stood by the window, peering out through the grime at the street below. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Do what? Stop him." Caleb unbuckled his gun belt and hung it on the bedpost, keeping it within arm's reach. "He was insulting you." She turned to face him. He was right, though, to them. That is what I am. $1 for a look. That is all I have ever been to men in towns like this. Caleb sat on the lone chair, pulling off his boots. "You are a prisoner of the territory," he said stubbornly. "You are under my protection until I deliver you to the judge. That means nobody touches you." She laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Protection. You protect the package so you can get paid on delivery. Do not pretend it is nobility. It is the job," Caleb said. That night, the town settled into a raucous hum of piano music and shouting from the saloon below. The noise filtered up through the floorboards. Caleb lay on his bedroll near the door, his back to the wall. Angel lay on the bed, staring up at the water-stained ceiling. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the window. Emotional boundaries, already strained by the day, began to crack in the intimacy of the darkness. "Why did you run?" Caleb asked. He had asked it before, but this time the question felt different. It wasn't an interrogation. It was an invitation. Angel was silent for a long time. "I did not steal the money." She said, "I know," Caleb said. She sat up, the springs of the bed creaking. "How do you know?" "Because you were starving. A thief with a strong box does not eat hardtack and stale jerky." She lay back down. "The judge, he has a son. William. He is charming. He smiles at everyone. He smiled at me." Caleb listened, his eyes closed, visualizing the scene. "He came to my room," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the worse. "He said I owed them, for the food, for the roof. He said the law was for people like him, not people like me. When I fought back, he fell. He hit his head. He was bleeding. I thought I killed him." She took a shaky breath. "I ran to the stable. The stable master tried to stop me. I hit him with a shovel. I just wanted to get away. I didn't burn anything." Caleb lay still. The story fit the tracks. It fit the fear. It fit the staged fire. They had burned the carriage house to cover up a scandal, to turn a domestic assault into a grand crime that justified a manhunt. "They are using the law as a weapon," she whispered. "Because they can. Because who will believe the Indian girl over the judge's son?" Caleb felt a heavy stone settle in his chest. He knew the answer. "No one. I have delivered 40 men to the hangman," Caleb said into the dark. Angel did not speak. She waited. Some of them were bad men. Caleb continued. "Killers, rapists, animals, but some of them were just desperate. I brought them in because the paper said they were guilty. I told myself it was justice. I told myself I was cleaning up the world." He opened his eyes, staring at the shadows. "But I was just a janitor for the rich men who draw the maps." The silence that followed was thick, charged with a sudden, terrifying understanding. They were both on the wrong side of the line, but they were standing on it together. Angel shifted on the bed. "Caleb." It was the first time she had used his name. He turned his head to look at her. She was a silhouette against the moonlight. The distance between the floor and the bed felt non-existent. The air in the room shifted. It became heavy, electric. There was a pull between them, an ache of closeness that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with two lonely people recognizing each other in the dark. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to tell her that he believed her. He wanted to cross the floor and offer something other than protection. Comfort. Maybe. Or simply contact that wasn't born of violence. He saw her lean slightly toward him, her breathing hitching. Caleb turned away, rolling onto his side to face the door. "Go to sleep, Angel," he said, his voice rough. "We leave at dawn." He heard her lie back down. He heard the disappointment in her silence. And it hurt worse than the kick of a shotgun. He was a professional. He had to remain a professional, because if he stopped being a professional, he didn't know what he would become. The morning brought a gray, leaden sky and a mood to match. They left Granite Wells before the town was fully awake, riding out past the piles of mine tailings and the silent machinery of the crushers. Caleb was on edge. The conversation from the night before hung between them like a fog. He found himself checking on her more often, turning in the saddle to make sure she was comfortable, adjusting the stirrup length for her. When they passed a group of travelers on the road, Caleb steered Bishop to place his body between Angel and the strangers. It was an instinctive move, a shielding gesture that he didn't even realize he was doing until he saw Angel watching him with that measuring look again. "You are doing it again," she said quietly. "What? Acting like a shield? I am protecting my investment." Caleb lied. They turned off the main road, taking a shortcut through a narrow canyon known as Devil's Throat. It was a place of red rock walls that rose 300 feet on either side, blotting out the sun. The trail was narrow, winding through boulders and scrub oak, the perfect place for an ambush. Caleb felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The silence was too deep. The birds had stopped singing. "Hold on tight," he murmured to Angel. Before she could answer, the crack of a rifle echoed off the canyon walls. A bullet struck the rock inches from Caleb's head, sending a spray of stone chips into his face. Bishop reared, screaming in panic. "Get down!" Caleb shouted. He threw himself and Angel off the saddle, dragging her to the ground behind a large boulder just as a second shot whined through the space where his chest had been. This was not a warning. They were shooting to kill. Caleb drew his peacemaker, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wiped the blood from his cheek where a stone chip had cut him. "Stay here," he ordered Angel. "Keep your head down." He peeked around the edge of the boulder. 2 men were positioned on the ridge above, their silhouettes framed against the gray sky. They had rifles. If they wanted you captured, they would be shooting at the horse. Caleb said grimly, "They want you dead." Angel was pressed into the dirt, her hands over her head. "They want to bury the truth," she said, her voice trembling but clear. Caleb looked at the ridge. He was pinned. He had a pistol. They had rifles. The range was bad. He saw one of the men moving, trying to get a better angle to shoot behind the boulder. Caleb made a decision. It was a stupid decision, the kind that got bounty hunters killed, but he made it anyway. "I am going to draw their fire," he told her. "When I move, you run for the cut in the rocks back there. Hide deep." "No," she grabbed his duster. "You will be killed. Better me than you," Caleb said, and he realized, with a jolt of shock, that he meant it. He broke cover, sprinting across the open trail toward a cluster of mesquite. A bullet kicked up dust at his heels. Another sang past his ear. He dove behind a fallen log, rolled, and came up in a crouch. He steadied his breathing. He had the angle now. The man who had moved was exposed. Caleb raised the Colt. He didn't aim with his eye, he aimed with his hand, a connection built over 20 years of survival. He squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked. On the ridge, the man threw his arms up and crumpled, tumbling down the loose shale of the slope. The second man hesitated, seeing his partner fall, and realizing that the bounty hunter down below was not the easy prey they expected. He scrambled back from the edge and disappeared. Caleb waited. 1 minute. 2. Silence returned to the canyon. He stood up slowly, keeping the gun trained on the ridge. He walked over to the body of the man who had fallen. He was a stranger, dressed in range clothes, but his boots were new. Caleb checked his pockets. He found a pouch of tobacco and a folded piece of paper. It was a telegram. "No witnesses. Stop. Girl must not reach court. Stop. Payment on completion. Stop." It was signed with a single initial, H. Holloway. "The judge." Caleb stared at the paper. His hand shook slightly. It wasn't the adrenaline of the fight, it was the rage. He had been hired to be an executioner, not a retriever. They had sent him to find her, and then sent these men to kill them both to ensure silence. He looked up. Angel was standing by the boulder. She had not run. She had watched him. She walked toward him, her eyes fixed on the dead man, then on Caleb. She saw the blood on his cheek. She saw the telegram in his hand. She reached out and took the paper from his fingers. She read it, her face hardening into a mask of resignation. "Now you know," she said. Caleb looked at her. He saw the bruises fading on her face. He saw the strength in her spine. And he saw the way she looked at him, not as a captor, but as the man who had just stood between her and a bullet. He holstered his gun. "I am not taking you back," he said. Angel blinked. "What?" "Not yet," Caleb corrected. "I am not taking you to the judge to be slaughtered." He walked over to Bishop, who was grazing nervously on a patch of dry grass. He checked the animal for wounds. The horse was fine. "Then what are we doing?" Angel asked. "Following him." Caleb swung into the saddle. He looked down at her. The wind caught the brim of his hat. "We are going to find proof," he said. "Real proof. I need a witness. Is there anyone left alive who saw what happened that night?" Angel thought for a moment. "There was the cook, Mrs. Gable, but she was sent away to the mining camps in the north. Then we go north," Caleb said. He reached his hand down. This time, she did not hesitate. She took his hand and swung up behind him. Her arms went around his waist, and this time, she held on tight. She pressed her forehead against his back. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Caleb said, turning the horse toward the northern pass. "We just made enemies of the most powerful men in the territory." He spurred the horse. As they rode out of the canyon, Caleb Reed knew he had just violated every rule in his contract. He had chosen the girl over the gold. He told himself it was because he needed to clear his conscience, because he needed to know the truth. But as he felt the warmth of her against his back, he knew that was a lie. He wasn't doing it for the truth. He was doing it for her, and that terrified him more than any gunman on a ridge. They rode north, into the teeth of the wind, leaving the road to the county seat behind them. The trail ascended into the spine of the territory, leaving the rolling dust of the lowlands for the jagged, unforgiving granite of the Blackwood Range. The air here was thin and sharp, tasting of pine resin and coming snow. It was a landscape that did not care if a man lived or died, and Caleb Reed respected that. It was honest. They had been riding for 3 days since the ambush at Devil's Throat. Bishop, the big roan, labored under the double weight, his breath pluming in white clouds against the slate-gray sky. The path was a narrow ribbon of shale cut into the side of a ravine that dropped 1,000 feet into nothingness. Caleb felt the woman behind him shivering. It was not a violent shaking, but a constant, low-frequency vibration that traveled through her ribs and into his back. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since they left the valley floor. "We need to stop," Angel said. Her voice was thin, snatched away by the wind. 2 miles, Caleb replied, not turning his head. "There is a line shack on the ridge. If we stop here, the wind will cut us to ribbons." She did not argue. She simply tightened her grip on his duster. They reached the shack as the sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long, bruised shadows across the snowpack. It was a crude structure of rough-hewn logs and mud chinking, built by prospectors who had likely died broke or frozen. But it had a roof, and inside, there was a stone hearth. Caleb tended to the horse first. He rubbed Bishop down with a handful of dry straw, checked the animal's hooves, and draped his own heavy saddle blanket over the beast. Only then did he turn his attention to the human matters. Inside the shack, Angel was trying to coax a fire from a pile of dry kindling left in the corner. Her fingers were blue and clumsy. "Let me," Caleb said. He knelt beside her. He struck a match, the sulfur flare brief and bright in the gloom, and nursed the flame until the wood caught. The warmth began to bleed into the room, pushing back the biting chill. They ate a supper of hard biscuits and dried beef, washing it down with melted snow water. The silence between them was no longer the hostile quiet of the first days. It was heavy with things unsaid. Caleb watched her across the fire. The firelight softened the sharp angles of her face, but it could not hide the exhaustion in her eyes. "You said there was a witness," Caleb said, "in the mining camps." Angel nodded slowly. "Silas Thorne. He was the surveyor for the syndicate. He was there the night it happened." "Tell me," Caleb said. "Not what the poster says. Tell me what happened." Angel looked into the flames. She pulled her knees to her chest, a protective gesture that made her look very young. "It was not a carriage house fire," she began quietly. "And I did not steal a strongbox." Caleb waited. He sat with his back to the wall, his long legs stretched out, his eyes fixed on her. The judge wanted the water rights to the Miller homestead. She said, "Old man Miller would not sell. He had a deed from before the war. The judge sent his son, William, and the foreman to persuade him. I was in the wagon. I was supposed to cook for the men during the roundup. I did not know what they intended. She paused, her breath hitching. They did not talk. She whispered. William shot him. He shot an unarmed man in his own doorway. Then he turned to me. He saw that I was watching. He laughed. He said that a half-blood girl's word was worth less than the bullet he had just used. Caleb felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was a common enough story in the West. Land was power, and power was written in blood. So you ran, Caleb said. I tried to help Miller, she said, her voice trembling. But he was gone. William grabbed me. He said I was part of it now. He said if I ever spoke of it, he would see me hanged. That night, back at the main house, I tried to leave. He cornered me. That was when I hit him. That was when I ran. Caleb looked at his hands. They were scarred and stained, the hands of a man who had done violence for money. But he had never killed a man for land. He had never killed a man who wasn't holding a weapon. Silas Thorne saw it? Caleb asked. He was there, Angel said. He held the horses. He saw William pull the trigger. He looked sick, but he said nothing. He quit the next day and headed for the high country. He is afraid of them. He should be, Caleb muttered. He stood up and moved to the single bunk built into the wall. It was a wooden frame strung with rawhide, topped with a mattress of pine boughs and old sacking. Take the bed, Caleb said. Angel looked up. The floor is fine. I am used to it. Take the bed, he repeated, his voice low but leaving no room for argument. The floor draws the cold. We have a hard ride tomorrow. She hesitated, then rose and moved to the bunk. She sat on the edge, looking at him. Why do you believe me? She asked. Caleb threw more wood on the fire, because a liar would have come up with a better story than a land dispute. A liar would have said he tried to ravish her. It plays better with a jury. But a land dispute, that is boring, that is business, and that is usually the truth. He unrolled his bedroll on the floor, positioning himself between the bunk and the door. It was habit. That night, the wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the door on its leather hinges. The temperature inside the shack dropped until Caleb could see his own breath in the dark. He heard Angel shifting on the bunk. The pine boughs rustled. Caleb? Her voice was small in the darkness. Yeah. She was silent for a long moment. If the world decides I am guilty, if the judge says I am a liar and the town says I am a savage, would you still protect me? Caleb lay still. He stared up at the invisible ceiling. It was the question that had been gnawing at him since he pulled the trigger in the canyon. He was a man of the law, even if he operated on its fringes. He believed in the order of things. I do not know, he said. It was an imperfect answer. It was the only honest one he had. He heard her exhale, a sound of resignation. But, Caleb added into the dark, I am still here. He felt her shift again. Then, he heard the soft pad of stocking feet on the dirt floor. What are you doing? He asked. It is too cold, she said. She lay down on the floor next to him. She did not ask. She simply brought the thin blanket from the bunk and spread it over his bedroll, then slid underneath it. Caleb stiffened. She was close, too close. He could feel the warmth radiating from her body. He could smell the scent of her skin, wood smoke and rain. She lay with her back to him, leaving a careful inch of space between them. Go back to the bed. Angel, he warned, though his voice lacked any real heat. I will freeze alone, she said. He did not argue. He knew she was right. The cold was a physical weight in the room. Slowly, the tension in his muscles began to uncoil. The heat was undeniable. It was a survival necessity, he told himself. Just body heat. But then, in her sleep, she shifted. She rolled backward until her back pressed against his chest. Her head found a place near his shoulder. Caleb stopped breathing. His hand, which had been resting on his holster, hovered for a moment. Then, with a will of its own, it moved. He did not pull away. He let his arm rest over the blankets, shielding her. The desire hit him then, not as a sharp lust, but as a deep, aching hollow in his chest. It was the desire to hold and be held, something he had denied himself for so long that he had forgotten the shape of it. He lay awake for hours, listening to the wind and the steady rhythm of her breathing, terrified by how right it felt to have her there. The mining town of Iron Creek was a festering sore on the side of the mountain. It was a collection of tents, shanties, and mud, populated by men who had given up on God and were now gambling on geology. They rode in 2 days later. The snow was knee-deep here, dirty and churned into sludge by wagons and mule teams. Caleb pulled his hat low. He knew men in this camp, men who read wanted posters. "We need to find a doctor," Caleb said quietly. "An old man named Evans. He patches up the miners when the blasts go wrong. If anyone knows where Thorne is, it will be him." They found the doctor's tent near the assay office. It smelled of carbolic acid and stale whiskey. Doc Evans was a small, bird-like man with spectacles that were cracked down the middle. "Reed," the doctor said, wiping his hands on a bloody rag. "I heard you were dead." "Or retired." "Not yet," Caleb said. He stepped inside, motioning for Angel to follow. The doctor's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "Is this the girl?" Evans asked. "The $3,000 girl?" "She is with me," Caleb said, his tone cutting off any further questions. "I am looking for Silas Thorne," Evans laughed. "A hacking sound. Thorne? That drunk? He is down at the Bucket of Blood Saloon, trying to drown a ghost. He has been there for a week. Says he is waiting for the devil to come collect a debt." Caleb nodded. "Stay here," he told Angel. "No," she said. "I am coming. It is a saloon," Caleb said. "I have seen the inside of a saloon before," she countered, "and he is my witness." Caleb looked at her. She had a jaw set like granite. He nodded once. "Keep your head down." The bucket of blood lived up to its name. It was dark, loud, and smelled of violence. When Caleb pushed through the doors, the conversation didn't stop, but it shifted. Eyes turned. Caleb Reed walked to the bar. He ordered a whiskey and turned to scan the room. He saw the other hunters in the corner. 3 of them. He knew one, a man named Gathers who hunted wolves when the bounties were scarce. Gathers was watching him, a sneer twisting his bearded face. "Well, look at this," Gathers called out, his voice carrying over the noise. "The great Caleb Reed. We heard you went soft. Reed, heard you were nursemaiding a squaw instead of bringing her in." The room went quiet. Caleb did not move. He kept his hand near his hip. "Watch your mouth. Gathers, or what?" Gathers stood up, hitching his belt. "You gonna shoot me? For speaking the truth? Word is out. Reed, the syndicate says you turned traitor. Says you are sleeping with the bounty." Laughter rippled through the room. It was ugly. Jagged laughter. Angel stiffened beside him. Caleb felt the heat rise in his neck. It was not the insult to him that burned. It was the slur against her. He turned slowly to face Gathers. "I am here for a man named Thorne," Caleb said evenly. "Anyone who stands in my way will find out just how soft I am." Gathers hesitated. He looked at Caleb's eyes, which were as cold and dead as the winter outside. He looked at the tied-down holster on Caleb's thigh. The wolf hunter sat back down, grumbling into his beer. Caleb turned his back on them, a calculated insult, and walked to a table in the dark rear of the room. A man was slumped over the table, his head resting on his arms. A bottle of rot-gut rye sat empty beside him. "Thorne," Caleb said. The man groaned and lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and unfocused. He looked like a man who had not slept in a month. "Who are you?" Thorne slurred. "I am the man who is going to save your life," Caleb said, "or watch you die. It is your choice." He pulled a chair out and sat. Angel stood behind him, her hand resting on the back of his chair. Thorne looked at Angel. Recognition flickered in his bleary eyes. "You," he whispered. "You are the girl. You remember me," Angel said. "I see you every night." Thorne muttered. "I see Miller, too." Caleb leaned forward. "We know what happened. Silas, we know William Holloway pulled the trigger. We need you to say it to a judge." Thorne laughed, a sound that turned into a sob. "A judge? Holloway owns the judges. He owns the sheriffs. He owns the ground we are walking on. If I talk, I'm a dead man. You are a dead man anyway, Caleb said brutally. They sent men to kill her. Do you think they will leave a loose end like you walking around? Thorne's face went pale. He looked around the saloon with paranoid eyes. I can protect you, Caleb said, but only if you come with us. Thorne shook his head violently. No protection can stop them. They have money. They have... He stopped. A man in a tailored suit had detached himself from the shadows near the bar. He did not look like a miner. He looked like a banker who had taken a wrong turn. Mr. Reed, the man said. His voice was smooth, cultured. Caleb didn't look up. I am busy. The man placed a hand on the table. He slid a heavy leather pouch across the wood. It clinked with the distinctive sound of gold double eagles. $5,000, the man said softly. For the girl, and for your silence. You walk away, Mr. Reed. You buy that farm in Oregon. You live a long, happy life. Caleb looked at the pouch. $5,000. It was more money than he had ever seen in one place. It was freedom. It was peace. He looked at Thorne, who was trembling. He looked at the man in the suit. Then he looked up at Angel. She was not looking at the money. She was looking at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes were vast and terrified. She was waiting for him to be the man the world said he was. She was waiting for the transaction to be completed. Caleb reached out and took the pouch. He weighed it in his hand. The man in the suit smiled. A wise choice. Caleb stood up. He held the pouch for a moment, then tossed it back. It hit the man's chest with a heavy thud, knocking the wind out of him. Keep it, Caleb said. You will need it to pay for your funeral. The man's smile vanished. You are making a mistake. Reed, a fatal one. I have made plenty of mistakes, Caleb said. This is not one of them. Get out of my sight before I forget that I'm a patient man. The man stared at him, his face twisting with malice. Then he snatched up the money and backed away, disappearing into the crowd. Caleb turned to Thorne. Get up, Silas. We are leaving. Thorne looked at him with awe. You refuse the money. Get up, Caleb roared. They dragged the drunk surveyor out into the cold night air. The wind hit them like a physical blow. They walked back toward the livery stable where they had left the horses. Angel was silent when they reached the privacy of the stable. Caleb leaned against a stall door, the adrenaline crashing out of him. He felt old. He felt tired. Why? Angel asked. She was standing in front of him. The lantern light caught the tears standing in her eyes. Why did you do it? She whispered. You could have had everything. Caleb looked at her. He wanted to say it was because of the law. He wanted to say it was because he hated the judge. But he couldn't lie to her anymore. I did not want everything, he said, his voice raspy. I just wanted to be able to look at myself in the mirror. And if I took that money, I would never be able to look at you again. Angel stepped closer. The barriers she had built, the mistrust, the fear, the anger, crumbled. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm. She took a step forward and leaned her forehead against his chest. It was a surrender. It was a plea. Caleb stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then, slowly, he raised his arms and wrapped them around her. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She fit against him as if she had been carved from his own rib. Thank you. She breathed into his coat. I have you, he whispered back. I have you. Angel. The moment stretched, suspended in time. The smell of hay and horses, the cold wind outside, the warmth of her body against his. It was an intimacy more terrifying than any gunfight. It was a responsibility. He had bound himself to her, not with chains, but with a choice. He pulled back slightly, looking down at her face. Her eyes were searching his. We cannot stay here, he said. That man, he will send others. And Thorne is useless to us here. Where do we go? She asked. Silverton, Caleb said. It is the district hub. There is a federal marshal there. A courthouse. If we are going to fight this, we have to do it in the light. We have to drag them out of the shadows. But that is the heart of their power, Angel said. I know, Caleb said, his thumb brushing the bruise on her cheek. But it is the only place where the truth might matter. We take Thorn. We ride for Silverton. Tonight? Tonight! Caleb moved to saddle Bishop. His hands were steady again. He had a direction now. He had a purpose. He was no longer hunting a bounty. He was fighting a war. And as he tightened the cinch, he looked over at Angel, who was helping a stumbling Silas Thorn onto a spare mule. She looked back at him, and for the first time, there was a ghost of a smile on her lips. It was a small thing, but in the dark of the mountains, it was enough to light the way. Silverton was not a camp. It was a testament to the conquering ambition of the territory. It had brick buildings with glass windows, boardwalks that were swept clean of mud every morning, and a courthouse that loomed over the town square like a limestone deity. It was a place where the law was cut into stone, but Caleb Reed knew that stone could be bought just as easily as flesh. They rode in under the cover of a gray, drizzling afternoon. Silas Thorn sat slumped on his mule, his hands trembling on the reins, a man broken by what he had seen and what he feared. Caleb kept Bishop close to Angel's mare, his eyes scanning the rooftops and the alleyways. He felt exposed here, in the Badlands. A man could see an enemy coming from 5 miles away. In Silverton, a knife could be waiting around any corner. The stairs began before they even reached the livery stable. News traveled faster than horses in this country, carried by telegraph wires and malicious gossip. As they passed the general store, a woman in a silk bonnet stopped and pointed. Caleb saw her mouth the words, "That woman." A group of men loitering near the barber shop stopped their conversation, their eyes tracking Angel with a mixture of lust and contempt. "They say she seduced the judge's son and then robbed him blind," one man said, loud enough to be heard over the clip-clop of hooves. "I heard she is a witch," another muttered. "Look at the hunter. He is bewitched. He is leading her like a prize pony instead of a prisoner." Angel kept her head high, but Caleb saw the way her knuckles whitened on the reins. The rumors were a weapon, a poison gas released to choke her credibility before she ever stepped foot in a witness box. To them, she was not a victim of a land grab. She was a seductress, a thief, a savage who had bitten the hand of civilization. "Ignore them," Caleb said, his voice low. "I can hear them." "Caleb," she replied, looking straight ahead. "They have already decided who I am." Caleb steered them toward the sheriff's office. He had to play this by the book, at least for now. If he ran, they were outlaws. If he walked in the front door, he was still a bounty hunter doing his job, technically. Sheriff Brady was a man Caleb had known for 10 years. He was a thick-set man with a mustache that hid his mouth and eyes that gave away nothing. He was sitting behind his desk, cleaning a shotgun, when Caleb walked in, leaving Angel and Thorn under the guard of the stable boy outside. "Reed," Brady said, not looking up. "You took your time. The wire from the judge said you had her a week ago." Caleb leaned against the doorframe, keeping his hand near his belt. The weather was bad in the high pass, and the prisoner required medical attention. Brady looked up then. His eyes were hard. "The judge says she is dangerous. He says she is a manipulator. He wants her transferred to his custody immediately. His deputies are on their way from the ranch. She is my prisoner until I sign the transfer papers," Caleb said calmly. "And I am not signing anything until I see a magistrate. I have new evidence. Brady, evidence that says the warrant is based on perjury." Brady laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Evidence? From who? The Indian girl? Reed, use your head. You are risking your license for a skirt." "I have a witness," Caleb said. "Silas Thorn." Brady went still. He set the shotgun down slowly. "Thorn, the drunk surveyor, the man who saw the murder," Caleb corrected. Brady stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. "You are playing a dangerous game. Caleb, the judge owns this town. He owns the brick in this building and the badge on my chest. If you hold on to her, you are making yourself an enemy of the law." "I am the law," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Or I used to be. I need 24 hours. Brady, I need to get a deposition from Thorne and file it with the district clerk. Give me that, and I will hand her over." Brady turned back. He looked at Caleb. Really looked at him, searching for the man who used to drink whiskey with him in Abilene. He sighed, rubbing his face. "Sundown tomorrow," Brady said. "If you do not have your paperwork by then, I am coming for her, and I will not be coming alone." Caleb nodded once. He turned and walked out. He had bought time, but the currency was cheap and the inflation was high. They secured a room at a boarding house on the edge of town, a place run by a widow who asked no questions as long as the coin was silver. Caleb put Thorne in the adjacent room and paid the stable boy $1 to sit in the hallway with a scattergun. "We need a newspaper," Caleb told Angel as they unpacked their saddlebags in the small, dim room. "A deposition is just paper. It can be lost. It can be burned. But if it is in print, if the whole territory reads it, they cannot sweep it under the rug." Angel sat on the edge of the bed. She looked tired, her skin pale against the dark wool of her dress. "Do you think anyone will print it?" she asked. "A story that calls a rich man a murderer?" "There is one man," Caleb said. "Josiah Black. He runs the Silverton Gazette. He hates the syndicate. He hates the judge. He is a stubborn, cantankerous old mule. But he is honest. They found the Gazette office in a basement down a side street. The air smelled of ink and stale tobacco. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the printing press was a heartbeat in the floor. Josiah Black was covered in ink. It was on his apron, his hands, and his nose. He looked at Caleb and Angel over the rim of his spectacles. "Caleb Reed," Black grunted. "I heard you were in town, and this must be the famous Angel." Angel stepped forward. She did not flinch under his scrutiny. "I am the woman they are lying about. Mr. Black." Black wiped his hands on a rag. "Everyone lies. Miss, the judge lies to keep his power. The priest lies to save souls. Why should I believe you are telling the truth?" "Because I have nothing to gain," Angel said. "They have taken my name. They have taken my freedom. All I have left is the truth." Caleb stepped in. "We have Silas Thorne. Josiah. He is ready to talk." He saw William Holloway kill Miller. Black's eyebrows shot up. "Thorne? If you can get Thorne to go on record, that changes things. That is not just a story, that is an indictment. But I need more than words. I need documents. I need proof of the land deed. I need to know why the judge wanted that land so badly he would kill for it." Angel went rigid. "The deed," she whispered. Caleb looked at her. "What about it?" "Miller kept it in a tin box under his floorboards," she said, her voice distant. "But the judge, he has a safe in his townhouse. I saw William put a stack of papers in there the night I ran. He was bragging about it. He said he had secured the legacy." Black shook his head. "You cannot break into the judge's house. Reed, that is burglary. It undermines the whole case." "I do not need to break in," Angel said softly. "I still have the key to the servants' entrance. I hid it in the garden wall before I left." Caleb stared at her. "It is too dangerous." "It is the only way," she said, turning to him. Her eyes were fierce. "You said we needed proof. I know where it is." The judge's townhouse sat on a hill overlooking the square, a sprawling Victorian mansion with iron gates and manicured hedges. It stood as a symbol of untouchable wealth. They waited until twilight. The fog had rolled in off the river, thick and gray, obscuring the streets. Caleb left Thorne at the boarding house and walked with Angel up the hill. As they approached the house, Caleb felt the change in her. She stopped breathing for a second. Her step faltered. She was looking at the lit windows on the second floor with a mixture of terror and nausea. This was the place. This was where the trauma lived. It wasn't just a house. It was a cage she had escaped. "Angel," Caleb said softly. "We can turn back." "No," she said. She forced air into her lungs. "No, I am not running anymore." She led him to the rear of the property, to a high stone wall covered in ivy. Her fingers searched the crevices of the stones, trembling slightly. "There," she breathed. She pulled out a heavy iron key, rusted but solid. The garden was quiet. They moved like ghosts through the dormant rose bushes. Angel unlocked the rear door, and they slipped into the scullery. The house smelled of beeswax and lavender, the scent of money. It made Caleb's skin crawl. He kept his hand on his gun, his ears straining for the sound of servants or guards. "The study is on the first floor," Angel whispered. They moved through the hallway. Angel stopped as they passed the main staircase. She was looking up at the landing. Her eyes were wide, seeing something that wasn't there. Caleb saw the way her throat worked, swallowing down a scream. He saw the anger warring with the shame in her eyes, the shame of a victim who has been told the crime was her fault. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was tight, grounding. "I am here," he signaled with his touch. "You are not alone in this house anymore." She looked at him, and the panic in her eyes receded just enough. She squeezed his hand back. They found the study. It was empty. The safe was a heavy iron box in the corner. "It is locked," Caleb whispered. Angel moved to the desk. She opened the top drawer. "He keeps the combination in his ledger," she said. "He is arrogant. He thinks no one would dare open it." She found the small leather book. Her hands were steady now, driven by a cold purpose. She read the numbers to Caleb. Left to 20, right to 10, left to 5. The tumbler clicked. Caleb pulled the heavy door open. Inside, there were stacks of cash and bundles of papers. Caleb riffled through them. Deeds, mining claims. And there, at the bottom, a yellow document with the name Miller at the top. "Got it," Caleb said. He shoved the papers into his coat. They were turning to leave when the front door opened. Voices drifted down the hall, loud, confident male voices. The judge. Caleb pulled Angel behind the heavy velvet curtains of the window. They stood pressed together in the small dark space, barely breathing. The study door opened. 2 men walked in. One was older, with the heavy tread of authority. The other was younger. "William Holloway. I want her found." William was saying, "She knows too much." "Father." "She is a hysterical woman," the judge replied, his voice like gravel. "Who will listen to her?" "Reed is listening to her," William snapped. "Then Reed goes down with her." The judge said, "I have already spoken to the sheriff. If Reed does not produce this magical evidence by tomorrow, he will be arrested for kidnapping and obstruction. And the girl, well, she will be returned to us." Caleb felt Angel shaking against him. It was a vibration of pure rage. He wrapped his arm around her waist, holding her tight, pressing her face into his shoulder to stifle any sound. The men poured drinks, the crystal decanter clinking. They stood there for 10 minutes, discussing the fate of the 2 people hiding 3 feet away from them. Finally, they left, closing the door behind them. Caleb waited a full 5 minutes before moving. Then, they slipped out the window, dropping into the garden, and ran into the fog. They did not go back to the boarding house immediately. They needed to make sure they weren't being followed. They ducked into a small, abandoned carriage shed behind an old church on the outskirts of town. It was dark inside, smelling of dry straw and old leather. Rain drummed against the roof, sealing them in. Angel collapsed onto a pile of hay, her chest heaving. She was laughing, a jagged, hysterical sound. "We did it," she gasped. "We stole it back." Caleb stood by the door, watching the street through a crack in the wood. He turned to look at her. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by something sharper, more volatile. He walked over to her. "You were brave, Angel." "I have never seen anyone braver." She looked up at him. Her hair had come loose from its braid, falling around her face in dark waves. The moonlight filtering through the slats of the shed illuminated her eyes. They were wide, dark, and suddenly very vulnerable. "I was terrified." She admitted, I thought if I went back there, I would become small again. I thought I would just be the girl they used." "You are not that girl," Caleb said roughly. "You are the woman who broke into the lion's den and walked out with his teeth." He knelt in front of her. The space between them seemed to vanish. The air was thick with the scent of rain and the heat of their bodies. Angel reached out and touched the scar on his face. Her fingers were cool, but they burned his skin. "Why did you stay?" she asked. "You could have walked away a dozen times. You could have taken the money." Caleb looked at her. He saw the question behind the question. She wasn't asking about the contract. She was asking about him. "I did not know I was lonely until I met you," Caleb said. The truth tumbled out of him. Unbidden. "I thought I was just solitary. I thought I liked the silence. But these last weeks, the silence is just noise when you are not there." Angel's hand moved to the back of his neck. Her fingers tangled in his hair. "I do not want to be a job, Caleb, and I do not want to be a charity case." "You are neither," he said. "What am I? You are the only thing I'm afraid to lose." The confession hung in the air, raw and terrifying. It was an admission of weakness for a man whose life depended on strength. But in that moment, it felt like the only strength that mattered. Angel leaned forward. Caleb met her. The kiss was not like the stories in the Penny Dreadfuls. It was not polished or practiced. It was desperate. It tasted of rain and fear and a longing that had been suppressed for a lifetime. It was the collision of two people who had been running for so long that they had forgotten how to stop. Caleb's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, anchoring her against him. He felt her sigh against his mouth, a sound of relief, of a burden being shared. They sank back into the hay, wrapped in his duster and the darkness. They did not speak of the future. They did not speak of the judge or the hanging rope that might be waiting for them. They spoke only with the press of skin against skin, the frantic beat of hearts against ribs. For that one night, the world outside did not exist. There was only the heat of the shed, the sound of the rain, and the undeniable truth that they belonged to each other. Morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Caleb woke to the sound of bells tolling in the distance. 7 o'clock. The light filtering through the shed was gray and cold. Angel was asleep on his arm, her face peaceful for the first time since he had met her. He watched her for a moment, memorizing the curve of her eyelashes, the way her breath hitched in her sleep. He wanted to stay in this moment forever, but the world was waiting. "We have to go," he whispered, shaking her gently. "We have to get the papers to Black." They hurried back to the boarding house, keeping to the alleys. The town was waking up. When they reached the house, the front door was open. Caleb drew his gun instantly. "Stay back," he hissed to Angel. He stepped inside. The hallway was empty. The chair where the stable boy had been sitting was overturned. Caleb ran to the room where they had left Thorne. The door was smashed in. Inside, the room was a wreck. The bed was overturned. The window was broken. And Silas Thorne was gone. On the wall, scrawled in something that looked disturbingly like blood, was a single word: sundown. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. They had taken him. He turned to run back to Angel, but she was already in the doorway, staring at the empty room. Her hand went to her mouth. "They found us," she whispered. Caleb grabbed her arm. "We have to move. Now." They ran down the back stairs, bursting out into the alley. But it was too late. Sheriff Brady was standing there, flanked by 6 deputies with Winchester rifles leveled at Caleb's chest. "Drop it. Read," Brady said. Caleb looked at the rifles. He looked at Angel. He tightened his grip on his Colt, his mind racing. He could take 2 of them, maybe 3, but Angel would be cut down in the crossfire. Slowly, carefully, he slid the gun back into his holster and raised his hands. "Where is Thorne?" Caleb demanded. "Thorne is in protective custody," Brady said smoothly. "He confessed. Read. He said you kidnapped him. He said you forced him to lie about the judge." "It is a lie!" Angel screamed, stepping forward. One of the deputies stepped up and shoved her back. She stumbled, hitting the brick wall. "Don't touch her!" Caleb roared. Stepping forward, the deputies cocked their rifles. The sound was a collective mechanical click that echoed in the alley. "Easy. Read," Brady warned. "Here is the deal. You have until sundown to deliver the girl to the courthouse. If you do, the kidnapping charges against you drop. You ride out of town, and you never come back. If you don't, well, you are an accomplice to a fugitive, and we will hang you both side by side. I have the deed, Caleb said. I have proof. Brady shook his head. Stolen property. It is inadmissible. And without a witness to authenticate it, it is just paper. He spat on the ground near Caleb's boots. You have until sundown. Don't make me shoot an old friend. The sheriff turned and walked away, his deputies backing out of the alley, leaving Caleb and Angel standing in the mud. They retreated to the livery stable, the only place left to them. Caleb paced the stall, his mind working furiously. They have Thorne, he said. They will make him sign a confession. They have the law, they have the town, and they have the guns. Angel sat on a bale of hay, hugging her knees. We lost, she said quietly. No, Caleb said. We only lose if we play their game. He stopped pacing. He looked at her. We cannot win in court. Angel, not here, not with the judge owning the bench. If I turn you in, you will never leave that jail cell alive. They will stage a suicide or an escape attempt, and you will be gone. I know, she said. So we don't turn you in, Caleb said. He walked over to Bishop and began to saddle the horse with frantic speed. What are you doing? Angel asked. We are leaving, Caleb said. But the sheriff, the deputies. To hell with the sheriff, Caleb said. He checked the cinch. We run. We head for the river. If we can cross the Snake River, we get into the unorganized territory. No jurisdiction. It is suicide, Angel said. The river is flooded, and they will chase us. Let them chase, Caleb said. He turned to her. He took her face in his hands. I am done with the law. Angel, the law is a lie. You are the truth. I am choosing you. He kissed her, hard and fast. Now get on the horse. They rode out of the stable at a gallop, ignoring the shouts of the townsfolk. They hit the main street like a thunderbolt. Sheriff Brady was standing on the steps of the courthouse. He saw them coming. Stop them, he shouted. Deputies poured out of the saloon and the office. Bullets whizzed past them, buzzing like angry hornets. One struck the pommel of Caleb's saddle, sending a spray of wood splinters into his hand. Keep your head down, Caleb yelled. Bishop was a war horse. He didn't shy. He plowed through the street, knocking over a water trough. Caleb fired 2 shots into the air to scatter the crowd. They burst out of the town limits and hit the open road. But behind them, the church bell began to ring, a frantic, continuous tolling. The alarm. They pushed hard for the river. The terrain turned brutal within miles. The road ended, replaced by game trails that wound through narrow canyons of red rock. The heat rose, baking the stone until it radiated like an oven. Behind them, a dust cloud marked the pursuit. A posse. 20 men at least. They reached the river at midday. It was swollen with snowmelt, a brown, churning torrent of icy water that roared over hidden rocks. We have to swim it, Caleb shouted over the roar of the water. Angel looked at the river. It looked like death. Trust me, Caleb yelled. He spurred Bishop. The horse plunged into the freezing water. The current grabbed them instantly, dragging them downstream. The water was shockingly cold, stealing the breath from their lungs. Angel clung to Caleb's waist, gasping as the water surged over her head. Bishop struggled, his head high, legs churning against the power of the river. Bullets began to splash into the water around them. The posse had reached the bank. Swim! Caleb screamed at the horse. They were swept downstream, spinning in the current. A submerged log struck Caleb's knee, a blinding flash of pain, but Bishop found footing on a gravel bar. The horse lunged, heaving himself up the far bank, dripping and trembling. They scrambled up the slope, into the cover of the cottonwoods. They didn't stop. They rode until the sun began to set, until Bishop was stumbling with exhaustion. They found refuge in a box canyon, hidden from the main trails. Smoke was rising from a cluster of tents pressed against the canyon wall. Caleb drew his gun, but kept it low. It was a camp of Chinese rail workers, men who had been discarded by the railroad companies when the tracks were finished. They were outcasts, forbidden by law to own mining claims, living on the edge of starvation. A man stepped out of the nearest tent. He was old, his face a map of wrinkles, wearing a faded blue tunic. He looked at Caleb's gun, then at the exhausted horse, and finally at Angel, who was shivering uncontrollably in her wet clothes. He did not raise a weapon. He raised a hand in greeting. "We have no money," Caleb rasped, his voice cracking. "We are hunted." The old man looked at Angel. He saw the exhaustion. He saw the fear. He nodded slowly. "The hunted are welcome here," the man said in perfect, accented English. "We know the sound of the law's boots." He gestured to the fire. "Come, eat." Caleb helped Angel down. She could barely stand. He wrapped his arm around her, supporting her weight. They walked toward the fire, two fugitives with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the price on their heads. But as Angel leaned into him, Caleb knew he had made the only trade that mattered. He had traded his reputation for her life. And looking at the firelight dancing in her dark eyes, he knew he would do it again. The box canyon was a wound in the earth, a jagged tear of red rock hidden behind a curtain of scrub oak and twisted juniper. The air here smelled of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, metallic tang of boiled tea. It was a place where the world threw the things it did not want to see. The community that had taken them in was not a town. It was a collection of canvas tents, dugouts carved into the soft sandstone, and shacks built from railroad ties and stolen lumber. The people here were the refuse of the great American expansion, Chinese laborers with backs broken by the Central Pacific, indigenous families pushed off reservations, and drifters who had simply lost the ability to pretend they were civilized. Caleb Reed sat on a flat rock near the entrance of the dugout he shared with Angel. He was cleaning his Winchester, the rhythm of the rag against the metal a soothing, familiar meditation. But his eyes were not on the gun. They were scanning the canyon rim, watching for the flash of a spyglass or the dust of riders. He was a wolf hiding among sheep, and the feeling sat ill in his gut. Angel was down by the stream that cut through the center of the camp. She was kneeling beside a woman named May, helping her scrub a pile of rough tunics against the river stones. May was small, her face a map of hardship. Her husband killed 3 years prior in a blasting accident for which the company paid nothing. Caleb watched them. He saw Angel laughing at something May said, a rare, genuine sound that carried over the noise of the water. He saw the way she didn't flinch when a group of Paiute men walked by, carrying a deer carcass. In the towns, in the places where the law was written on paper, Angel was a pariah. Here, among the discarded, she was just another soul trying to keep the cold out. She walked back up the slope an hour later, her hands red from the icy water, carrying a basket of wet clothes. She sat beside him, leaning her shoulder against his knee. "They are good people," she said softly. "They are survivors," Caleb corrected, sliding the bolt back into the rifle. "There is a difference. Good gets you killed out here. Survival is what keeps you breathing." Angel looked at him. Her eyes were dark and searching. "You think they are weak because they do not carry guns. I think they are targets," Caleb said. "And I brought a bullseye into their living room." He looked around the camp. He saw a man with one leg hobbling on a crutch made of a shovel handle. He saw a woman nursing a child who looked too small for its age. "I used to hunt people like this," Caleb said. The confession came out of him like a stone he had been carrying in his throat. Not the Chinese, maybe, but the poor. The ones who stole a horse to get out of a valley that was starving them. The ones who shot a foreman because he beat them. I brought them in, took the money, and bought whiskey. I told myself it was the law. Angel reached out and covered his hand, the one resting on the stock of the rifle. Her skin was rough, calloused from the work of the last few days, but her touch was gentle. "You did not know," she said. "I knew," Caleb said, his voice bitter. "I just didn't care. It was easier not to look them in the eye. It was easier to look at the poster and the reward." He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. The contact was electric, a grounding wire in a storm. "I look at you," Angel said. "I look at you, and I see a man who could have left me in the snow, a man who could have turned me in for a fortune. You are not the man who hunted those people anymore." Caleb looked at her. The wind caught a loose strand of her hair, blowing it across her face. He reached up and tucked it behind her ear, his thumb lingering on her cheekbone. The intimacy of the gesture was startling. It wasn't the desperate, adrenaline-fueled passion of the carriage shed. It was quiet. It was domestic. It was the kind of intimacy that said, "I am here, and I am not going anywhere." "We have to finish this," Caleb said. "We cannot stay here. If the judge finds us, he will burn this canyon to the ground just to get to you." "We have the papers," Angel said. Caleb nodded. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the bundle they had stolen from the safe. He had spent the last 2 nights poring over them by the light of a tallow candle. It was worse than a land grab. The ledger detailed a payroll for a private militia, labeled as security expenses, but it also listed payments to the warden of the territorial prison. "He is using convict labor," Caleb said. "He is arresting men for vagrancy, for debt, for looking at a deputy sideways. Then he leases them out to the syndicate to dig his irrigation canals. They die in the ditches, and he buries them in unmarked graves. That is why he wanted Miller's land. It is the choke point for the water. Without that land, the canals are useless." Angel stared at the ledger. "That is slavery," she whispered. "It is worse," Caleb said. "It is slavery sanctioned by the state. They needed to get this to Josiah Black, but Silverton was locked down. Sheriff Brady would have every road watched." That evening, a rider came into the canyon. He was not an enemy. He was an old man named Ben Taggart, a former marshal who had been pushed out of office when the syndicate bought the election. He rode a mule and looked like a prospector, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Taggart found them by their fire. He swung down from his mule with a groan of stiff joints. "Caleb Reed," Taggart said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "You look like hell warmed over." "You look like you need a drink." "Ben," Caleb replied, pouring coffee from a battered pot. Taggart took the tin cup. "I heard you were making noise. Big noise. The judge is screaming about anarchy. He has posters up in every town from here to the border. 5,000 for you. 5,000 for the girl." "Dead or alive?" Caleb asked. Taggart grimaced. "The posters say alive. But the men he sent? They do not look like the arresting type." "Who did he send?" "Ezra Pike." Caleb went still. The name was a curse in the territory. Pike was not a bounty hunter. He was a butcher. He had worked as a scout for the Army during the Apache Wars, and he had been discharged for excessive cruelty. That took some doing. "Pike is here?" Caleb asked. "He is tracking you," Taggart said. "He has 12 men, hard men. They are cutting for sign along the river. It is only a matter of time before they find the turnoff to this canyon." Angel looked at Caleb. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "We have to leave. We cannot bring that man here." Taggart shook his head. "Too late for that. Miss, if Pike finds this place empty, he will burn it anyway, just for sport. And if you run now, he will catch you in the open." Caleb stood up. He looked at the fragile tents, the families cooking their evening rice. He felt the weight of the Winchester in his hand. "We make a stand," Caleb said. Taggart raised an eyebrow. "There are 2 of us. Reed, maybe 3, if you count the girl. Pike has 12 guns. We have the ground," Caleb said. He pointed to the narrow neck of the canyon entrance. "They have to come through there, single file. We bottleneck them?" "And the people?" Angel asked. "Get them to the caves at the back of the canyon," Caleb ordered. "Hide the children. Anyone who can shoot, put them on the ridge." The preparation was a frantic, silent dance. Lee Wei, the elder of the camp, understood the danger immediately. He organized the evacuation of the women and children to the upper caves. The men who had worked on the railroad, men who knew how to handle blasting powder and pickaxes, took up positions on the canyon walls. They had few guns, but they had rocks, and they had rage. Caleb positioned himself behind a fallen boulder near the entrance. Taggart took the opposite side. Angel refused to go to the caves. "I can shoot," she said, holding a heavy dragoon pistol Taggart had lent her. "You are the target." "Angel," Caleb said. "If they see you, they will rush us. Then I will make sure they do not see me until it is too late," she replied. She took a position on a ledge above Caleb, hidden by a screen of juniper. They waited. The moon rose, cold and indifferent, turning the red rocks to silver. At midnight, the coyotes stopped howling. "Here they come," Caleb whispered. Shadows detached themselves from the darkness of the valley floor. Riders. They moved slowly, their horses' hooves wrapped in sacking to muffle the sound. Ezra Pike rode in the lead. He was a giant of a man, wearing a coat made of buffalo hide. He rode with the arrogance of a predator who knows he is at the top of the food chain. They stopped 50 yards from the canyon mouth. Pike raised a hand. "Reed!" he shouted. His voice was a deep boom that echoed off the walls. "I know you are in there. Send the girl out, and we will leave the Chinamen alone." Caleb did not answer. He sighted down the barrel of the Winchester, aiming for the center of Pike's chest. "You have 1 minute. Reed!" Pike yelled. "Then we start killing everything that moves." Caleb looked up at the ledge. He couldn't see Angel, but he knew she was there. He knew she was terrified, but she hadn't run. "Time is up!" Pike roared. He spurred his horse. The 12 men charged, a thundering wave of hooves and gunfire. "Now!" Caleb shouted. He fired. The lead rider next to Pike flew backward out of his saddle. Taggart opened up from the other side, his shotgun booming like a cannon. The canyon mouth erupted into chaos. The narrow pass forced the riders to bunch up. The railroad workers on the cliffs shoved massive boulders over the edge. The rocks crashed down, smashing into the horses and men, breaking the charge. But Pike was a professional. He rallied his men, forcing them forward through the dust and the screaming horses. They dismounted, taking cover behind the fallen rocks, returning fire with repeating rifles. Bullets chipped the stone around Caleb's head. He ducked, levering another round into the chamber. He popped up, fired, and saw another man drop, but they were flanking him. 3 of Pike's men had scrambled up the scree slope. Trying to get the high ground, they were heading for the caves. Angel saw them. From her position, she had a clear line of sight to the path leading to the refuge. A woman, May, had frozen on the trail, clutching her child, pinned down by the gunfire. One of Pike's men saw them. He raised his rifle, grinning. Angel didn't hesitate. She broke cover. She stood up on the ledge, silhouetted against the moon. "Hey!" she screamed. "I am here!" The gunman turned, distracted. Angel fired the dragoon pistol. The heavy ball missed the man, but it struck the rock next to his face, spraying him with fragments. He flinched, stumbling back. It gave May the second she needed to scramble into the cave. But Angel was exposed. "There she is!" Pike screamed. A hail of bullets tore into the juniper bush. Angel threw herself flat, crawling backward. Caleb felt a surge of terror so pure it tasted like copper. "Angel!" he roared. He broke his cover. He stood up, firing the Winchester as fast as he could work the lever. He walked into the open, drawing every eye, every gun toward him. He didn't care about cover. He didn't care about survival. He only cared about keeping the lead away from that ledge. He dropped one man, then another. A bullet grazed his ribs, feeling like a hot poker. But he didn't stop. Taggart laid down a withering cover fire. The railroad workers charged down the slope, wielding pickaxes and shovels, screaming a war cry in a language Pike's men didn't understand. The sheer ferocity of the defense broke them. Pike's men were hired killers, bullies who liked easy targets. They were not prepared to fight a canyon that bit back. "Pull back!" Pike shouted, firing wildly. They retreated, dragging their wounded, leaving 4 bodies in the dust. They scrambled onto their horses and galloped away into the dark. Caleb stood in the center of the canyon mouth, his chest heaving, the empty rifle smoking in his hand. He turned toward the ledge. "Angel?" There was silence. "Angel!" She scrambled down the slope, sliding in the loose rock. Her face was scratched, her dress torn, but she was whole. She ran to him. He dropped the rifle and caught her, the impact nearly knocking him over. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of dust and gunpowder and life. "You foolish, brave girl," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I had to," she gasped. "He was going to shoot the baby." Caleb pulled back. He looked at her. Her eyes were bright with adrenaline and a fierce, terrifying pride. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was a warrior. He looked around. The camp was battered. Tents were shredded. 2 of the workers were wounded, but alive. Taggart walked over, reloading a shotgun. They will be back. Reed, Pike does not give up. He will go back to town, get reinforcements, maybe a Gatling gun. Caleb nodded. I know. He looked at Angel. We cannot stay here. We are bringing death to these people. Angel looked at the families emerging from the caves. She looked at May, who was weeping silently, holding her child. We cannot run anymore. Caleb, she said, there is nowhere left to run. Caleb looked at the ledger in his pocket. He looked at the moon hanging over the Blackwood Range. You are right, he said. He turned to Taggart. Ben, can you get a message to Josiah Black? I can try, Taggart said, but the telegraph lines are watched. I don't need a telegraph, Caleb said. I need you to ride to Silverton. Tell Black to have the presses ready. Tell him we are coming in. You are going back to Silverton? Taggart asked, incredulous. You are walking into the lion's den? No, Caleb said, his voice hard as iron. We are walking into the courthouse at high noon. He looked at Angel. We are going to bring the fight into the daylight, he said. If they want to kill us, let them do it on the steps of the courthouse, in front of God and everyone. Let them show the world what they really are. Angel nodded. She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong. When? She asked. Tomorrow, Caleb said. He turned back to the camp. He helped carry the wounded to the fire. He sat with Angel as she bandaged a cut on his side. They shared a bowl of rice, their shoulders touching. Later, in the quiet hours before dawn, they lay together in the dugout. The fear was there, a cold current beneath the surface, but it was matched by a strange, calm resolve. Caleb traced the line of her jaw with his finger. I love you, he said. He had never said it before. He had never thought he would say it to anyone. Angel looked at him in the darkness. I know, she whispered, and I love you. That is why we have to win. They didn't sleep. They lay awake, holding on to each other, waiting for the sun to rise on the day that would either free them or kill them. When the first light of dawn touched the peaks, painting them in hues of blood and gold, Caleb rose. He put on his hat. He checked his gun. Angel stood beside him. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders. She looked at the horizon. Ready? Caleb asked. She looked at him, and her eyes were clear. Ready, she said. They mounted their horses. They rode out of the canyon, leaving the refuge behind, riding toward the town that wanted them dead. They rode side by side, not as fugitive and captor, but as partners. The road to Silverton was long and dusty, but for the first time, Caleb Reed was not looking over his shoulder. He was looking straight ahead. The sun hung directly overhead, a blinding white disk that bleached the color out of the Silverton town square. It was high noon, that mythical hour when shadows vanished and men were forced to stand entirely in the light. Caleb Reed rode Bishop down the center of Main Street. Beside him, on a borrowed mare, rode the woman the territory called Angel. They did not ride with the frantic speed of fugitives. They rode at a walk, back straight, eyes forward. Flanking them were Ben Taggart and 3 of the Chinese railroad workers from the canyon, men who carried pickaxe handles and grim expressions. The street was unnaturally quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic strike of horseshoes on the hard-packed dirt. But the silence was deceptive. The town was awake. In the hands of nearly every man on the boardwalk, white sheets of paper fluttered in the hot breeze. Josiah Black had done his work. The special edition of the Silverton Gazette had hit the streets an hour ago. The headline, set in bold, black type that screamed from the page, read, "The blood on the judge's hands, a testimony of murder and slavery." Caleb scanned the faces of the crowd as they passed. He saw shock, he saw anger, but mostly he saw doubt. For 20 years, Judge Holloway had been the god of this mountain. To see a god bleed ink was a terrifying thing. They reached the courthouse. It was a fortress of limestone, imposing and cold. Standing on the wide stone steps was Sheriff Brady. Behind him stood a dozen deputies, their rifles held at port arms. And behind them, sitting in a high-backed chair brought out to the veranda like a throne, was Judge Holloway. His son, William, stood at his shoulder, looking pale and erratic. To the left of the steps, leaning against a hitching post, was Ezra Pike. The tracker had bandaged his arm where the rock fragments had hit him in the canyon. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat and dead. Caleb reined Bishop in at the base of the steps. He dismounted slowly, looping the reins over the rail. He walked around and offered a hand to Angel. She took it. Her hand was steady. She wore the same torn, dust-stained dress she had worn in the canyon, but she wore it like royal vestments. She stepped down into the dust. "Caleb Reed." Sheriff Brady called out. His voice was tight. "You are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and inciting a riot. Drop your belt." Caleb did not reach for his buckle. He reached into his duster and pulled out the ledger. He held it up. The sun caught the gold lettering on the spine. "I am here to surrender evidence." "Brady," Caleb said. His voice carried across the silent square. "Evidence of grand larceny. Evidence of slavery. Evidence of murder." The judge stood up. His face was a mask of purple rage. "That is stolen property. Arrest him. Shoot him if he resists." Brady hesitated. He looked at the crowd. The townspeople had pressed in closer, forming a dense ring around the square. Miners, shopkeepers, ranch hands. They were not cheering, but they were watching. "I have a witness," Caleb announced. He stepped aside. Angel walked forward. She stopped 10 feet from the line of deputies. She looked small against the backdrop of the massive building and the armed men, but when she raised her head, she looked like a giant. She looked directly at William Holloway. "Tell them," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a knife. "Tell them what you did to Elias Miller." William flinched. "You are a liar," he spat, though his voice cracked. "You are a savage whore," the crowd murmured. The slur was ugly, familiar, a word used to dismiss women like her for 100 years. Angel did not blink. She did not look away. "My name is Elena," she said. The name hung in the air. It was the first time she had spoken it aloud in months. "My mother was Apache. My father was a soldier who died of cholera. I worked in your kitchen. Judge, I scrubbed your floors. I cooked your meals. I was invisible to you until your son needed someone to blame for his violence." She turned to the crowd. She did not plead. She testified. "I saw William Holloway shoot Elias Miller in the chest because the old man would not sign a piece of paper. I saw the judge pay the sheriff to burn the deed, and I saw them take men from the jail, men like you, men who had no money and no friends, and march them into the desert to dig their ditches until they died." "Lies," the judge roared. "She is a criminal. She seduced my son and stole my money. Look at her. She is dirty. She is nothing." Ezra Pike stepped away from the hitching post. His hand hovered over the heavy Remington on his hip. "Enough of this talk. Judge, let us finish it." Pike looked at Caleb. "I have been waiting for this. Read." Caleb stepped in front of Elena. He did not draw. He stood with his hands hanging loose by his sides. "If you shoot her—" "Pike, you have to go through me," Caleb said. Pike grinned. "2 for the price of 1. The tracker drew. He was fast, blurringly fast, but Caleb Reed had been a bounty hunter for 20 years. He did not draw to threaten. He drew to end. 2 shots rang out. They sounded like a single crack of thunder. Caleb felt a hammer blow to his left shoulder. He staggered back, his boots slipping in the dust. Ezra Pike stood motionless for a second. A look of profound confusion crossed his face. Then, a red blossom opened in the center of his chest. He collapsed backward, his gun clattering onto the stones. Silence slammed back down on the square. Caleb pressed his hand to his shoulder. Blood seeped through his fingers, dark and hot. He did not fall. He stayed on his feet, placing his body between Elena and the deputies. "Shoot them," the judge screamed, pointing a trembling finger. "Kill them all." The deputies raised their rifles. "No!" The shout came from the crowd. Josiah Black, the editor, pushed his way to the front. He was waving a sheaf of papers. "I have read the ledger," Black shouted. "It is all here, every name, every dollar. Sheriff Brady took $500 a month to look the other way." The crowd surged forward. It was a living thing now. An organism fed on outrage. A miner threw a rock. It struck the courthouse steps. Then another. "This isn't justice," someone yelled. Sheriff Brady looked at the crowd. He looked at Caleb, who was bleeding but still standing, his gun leveled at the deputies. He looked at the body of Ezra Pike. The wind had changed. The sheriff was a corrupt man, but he was a survivor. He saw the way the townspeople were looking at him. He saw the lynch mob forming in their eyes. "Put them down, boys," Brady said. "What are you doing?" the judge shrieked. "Do your duty." "I am," Brady said. He turned. He walked up the steps to where William Holloway stood shivering. "William Holloway," Brady said loudly. "You are under arrest for the murder of Elias Miller." "What?" William gasped. "My father. Your father is next," Brady said grimly. The judge lunged for the sheriff's gun. It was a desperate, pathetic act of an old man losing his empire. Brady backhanded him, sending the judge sprawling onto the limestone. The crowd roared. It was a sound of release, of a pressure valve finally blowing. Ben Taggart and the railroad workers rushed up the steps to secure the prisoners. The deputies, seeing their sheriff switch sides, lowered their rifles. Caleb holstered his gun. His knees felt like water. The world tilted sideways. "Caleb!" Elena was there. She caught him as he sagged. Her arm went around his waist, taking his weight. She pressed her hand over his wound, her fingers slippery with his blood. "I have you," she whispered. "I have you." He looked at her. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, but she was smiling. It was a fierce, triumphant smile. "We did it," Caleb rasped. Elena looked up at the courthouse, where the judge was being dragged away in irons, cursing the heavens. "No," she said. "You did it. You chose." Caleb shook his head weakly. "We chose." The aftermath was a blur of doctors and questions. Caleb was taken to the doctor's office, where the bullet was dug out of his shoulder. It had missed the bone, passing clean through the muscle. A lucky shot, the doctor said, or maybe Pike had hesitated. For 3 days. Silverton was a town turned upside down. A federal marshal arrived from the capital to take custody of the judge and his son. The testimony of Silas Thorne was found in the sheriff's safe. He had not escaped, but he had been hidden away. Terrified, into silence, with the judge in chains. Thorne found his voice again. Caleb sat on the porch of the boarding house, his arm in a sling. The pain was a dull throb, a constant reminder of the price of the ledger. A man in a suit walked up the steps. It was the federal marshal. "Mr. Reed," the marshal said. "Marshal." The man took off his hat. "The territory owes you a debt. You exposed a rot that went deep. The governor is impressed." Caleb said nothing. He watched the street. There is talk of reinstatement. The marshal said, "Your license, maybe a badge. The town needs a sheriff. Now that Brady is being indicted, you could have your old life back. You could be a man of standing again." Caleb looked at the marshal. He thought about the badge. He thought about the respect that came with it. Then he looked down the street. Elena was walking toward the boarding house. She was carrying a bag of groceries. She stopped to talk to a woman on the corner, Mrs. Gable, the cook who had been sent away. The woman was holding Elena's hand, weeping. Elena looked up and saw Caleb. She didn't wave. She just looked at him with that steady, knowing gaze. "I have a life," Caleb said to the marshal. The marshal followed his gaze. He saw the Indian woman. He frowned slightly. "If you stay with her, Reed, people talk. It will be hard. You will never be fully accepted in polite society. A man with your reputation, you could do better." Caleb laughed. It was a genuine laugh, deep and rasping. "Better?" Caleb asked. "Marshal, I have spent my life hunting men who were better on paper than they were in their souls. I have seen what polite society does in the dark." He stood up, wincing slightly as his shoulder protested. That woman walked into fire for people she didn't know. She stood on those steps and looked the devil in the eye. "There is no one better." The marshal put his hat back on. He nodded once. "Good luck. Read. You will need it." "I don't need luck," Caleb said. He walked down the steps to meet her. Autumn came early to the high country that year. The aspen trees turned to rivers of gold that flowed down the sides of the mountains, and the wind carried the sharp, clean scent of frost. The cabin sat in a valley 3 days' ride from Silverton. It was not a grand ranch. It was a homestead that had been abandoned years ago, the roof sagging and the fences down. Caleb and Elena had spent the last 2 months rebuilding it. They worked from sunrise to sunset. Caleb swung a hammer with his good arm, while Elena mixed mud for the chinking and planted a winter garden in the rocky soil. It was hard work. It was brutal, back-breaking work, but it was theirs. On a Tuesday evening, as the sun began to set, they stood on the porch. The air was cold. Caleb wore a heavy wool coat, his arm finally out of the sling, though it still stiffened when the weather turned. Elena stood beside him. She wore a dress of blue calico that she had sewn herself. Her hair was loose, blowing in the wind. They watched the horses grazing in the lower pasture. Bishop was there, looking fat and content, alongside the mare. "It will snow tonight," Caleb said. Elena nodded. "We have enough wood, and the root cellar is full." She leaned against the porch railing. Her face had changed in the months since the trial. The gauntness of starvation was gone. Her skin was brown from the sun, and the bruises had faded into memory. But the shadows in her eyes were not entirely gone. You didn't survive what she had survived without carrying the weight of it. Sometimes, she would wake up in the night, gasping, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. And Caleb would be there, pulling her close, anchoring her back to the present. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. Caleb looked at her. "Miss what?" "The hunt, the road, the silence." Caleb looked out at the valley. He remembered the lonely nights. He remembered the whiskey. He remembered the feeling of sleeping with his back to a wall, waiting for a bullet. "I missed none of it," he said. He turned to her. He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were rough, scarred, and stained with earth. Her hand fit into his perfectly. "I was a ghost. Elena, I was walking through the world, but I wasn't in it. You woke me up." Elena squeezed his hand. She looked out at the darkening hills. "They still hate us, you know," she said softly. "In the town, when we go for supplies, I see the way they look at us. The white hunter and his squaw. They think it is shameful." "Let them look," Caleb said. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "They look because they are jealous." "Jealous?" She laughed, a dry sound. "Yes," Caleb said, "because they are terrified of the world. They build their fences and their laws to keep the wild out, but we live in it. We survived it, and we chose each other in spite of it. That is a freedom they will never understand." He kissed the top of her head. "You run if you want." "Angel," he whispered, the old line coming back as a gentle echo. Elena looked up at him. Her eyes were fierce and tender and full of a hard-won peace. "I am not running," she said. "I am home." They stood there as the sun dipped below the peaks, casting the valley into twilight. The first flakes of snow began to fall, drifting down like white feathers. They did not go inside immediately. They stood on the threshold of their fragile, imperfect life, watching the night come on, unafraid of the dark because they were finally, truly, holding the light. The West was vast, and it was cruel, and it would try to break them again. They knew this, but as the snow covered the ground, turning the world clean and new, Caleb Reed and Elena stood together. Two wounded things that had healed into something stronger than iron. They went inside and closed the door against the wind. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey across the dust and snow of the American frontier, and I hope you felt the grit and the heart of it. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale of survival and redemption, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories from the saddle. Share your thoughts in English. I would love to hear what you think of Caleb and Elena's journey. Until next time, keep your powder dry.